stick to the script. And you guys let me know when we're on air.
Whenever you.
Okay, we're on. So, okay, well, welcome everybody to the Thursday, January 25th, 2024 Webster Town Board Workshop. We have two agenda items tonight. The first one is a presentation by our Highway Superintendent Pat Stevens on our proposed expansion of the drainage district in Webster to include commercial properties in January of 2025, a year from now. So, Pat, you're on.
Correct. Thank you, Tom. I did it perfectly. This is sort of a counterpart presentation to some efforts we had last year and related to the drainage district. So last year we worked on residential properties, now we're on commercial. So let's get right into it. The biggest item I think we've seen as far as is what's being changed, what is being updated as it relates to this. We do have existing sections in our code to speak to drainage fees for commercial properties. So much like the residential side, we're really trying to optimize and make sure that those fees are being spread across all users, which is, in this case, all commercial properties, just like it was all residential properties last year. So the revisions that are proposed in the upcoming months that we'll be coming to the board with will ensure that commercial properties are paying fees in accordance with town code, and that the fee calculation is using the most up-to-date data. And we'll get into what that means in a little bit. But one of the items is the next bullet there, which is that the town equivalent residential unit, which is kind of the unit that drives the cost and how we evaluate what the cost is per each commercial property, was recently updated as a part of this effort to make sure that it represents an equivalent residential unit. So we took a large quantity of the 16,000 residential units in town and came up with an average of how much impervious surface each of those properties has between the roof of your house, your driveway, other outbuildings you might have. And in this particular instance, what we found is that the average residential property in Webster now has actually quite a lot more than the existing code had stated. Originally, this equivalent unit was 3,500 square feet, was what was being used to determine these calculations. Through the direct mapping using our GIS system, we were able to determine that the actual average residence in Webster right now is quite a lot more, 5,183 square feet. What that ends up yielding, once we get into the calculation, is actually overall reduction to commercial properties from what it would have been in the existing code, even using 3,500. Because their metric is their total area divided by this unit. So the bigger this unit is, the lower number of payment units that they would have on their properties. So that's actually an improvement, and that creates a reduction. So the fees will be charged to all commercial properties regardless of when they were constructed, which speaks to some of the legacy items that properties developed within a certain amount of time. All of our newer properties receive these fees, but some of the older properties before these fees were needed did not. So we want to make sure it's spread across all the properties that have the same use so that it is equal and as low as possible for each. And then another part of the code that's being updated in relation to these fees is that we're offering discounts for commercial properties that maintain their own stormwater facilities. There's not currently any provisions in our code for discounts on these fees. So we're adding that in for our properties that do maintain their own on-site stormwater systems. So I touched on it really quickly with the previous drainage efforts. In 2023, we did the expansion of the consolidated drainage district to all residential properties. That was an increase of about 4,000 properties. We had roughly 12,000 or so residential properties that were already paying the consolidated drainage fee. And we spread that across all of them. And we see this year from, I was looking back at the presentation we did last year, we were estimating that the equivalent residential unit dollar value for those units was about $42 per unit. And just with that switch alone to incorporate all the residential, the projection we're putting in the cost for the commercial properties, which would be the 2025 for everybody, residential and commercial, is about $40. So that's gone down a couple of dollars per unit already. and we hope to be able to continue to do that by having everything equally distributed. We also do annual reviews and evaluation of drainage maintenance needs. Unfortunately, the reality in the last few years is those needs continue to go up. Our streams and drainage ways that convey water to the lake are needing more and more maintenance, or the maintenance is not getting done as fast as possible. So we need more efforts in order to keep up with that, make sure we don't get into a situation where they're in disrepair. And then increase efficiency and consistency by establishing stormwater maintenance agreements on new commercial properties. Maria, the admin for the DPW, has been helping a lot with that. Mary Harrington, before she left, had a big effort to send letters and things out to places we knew had ponds and maybe weren't submitting their annual reports in conformance with the MS4s, along with making sure that as we're going through the development process, we're hitting that step where if an HOA or a commercial property is going to maintain their own stormwater ponds, that we get an agreement with them to do so. So if they decide in the future that they don't want to do that, there's an agreement in place with our municipality that says that someone has to do that. It's a better situation for us as an MS4. So, what is this funding? What's the driver behind needing more fees outside of regular taxes, right? That's always the big question. As I kind of alluded to a minute ago, the town of Webster, like many towns in Monroe County, are MS4. The MS4 is a program that the DEC is put through and passed down to municipalities to maintain. Those have 6 key parts to them: public education, public participation, illicit discharge program, construction stormwater management, post-construction stormwater management, and municipal pollutant prevention program. I starred 4 and 5 because at the highway department, the work that we do falls under 4. It's the preventative maintenance, it's maintaining the ponds, the drainage ways that get full of trees and sediment, and that type of stuff. That's where the majority of the cost is right now. There is significant cost in the annual reporting and compliance overall to the program, but a lot of the boots on the ground is the actual crews out doing the drainage work, and that falls under those 2 items of the MS4 program. So again, the MS4 program is a program that requires municipalities to develop stormwater management program on their own that will reduce the amount of pollutants carried by the stormwater during storm events to water bodies to the maximum extent possible. The goal of the program is to improve water quality and recreational use of waterways. The entire town of Webster is bound by this program, which is why making sure that our drainage districts encompass the entire town, commercial properties and residential together makes sense. The MS4 program is ever evolving in standards and reporting expectations as well as procedures. The most recent one just happened earlier this month. They put out a new general permit with some new requirements and expectations, better clarification on certain things, but essentially, so if we look at cost to a certain extent, like right now we have to go through the effort of getting up to speed on that permit. What are the differences? What are the changes? What are we required to do when the next development comes in based on this new permit that maybe we weren't before? It takes quite a lot of time to digest that document. We're working with MRB, our current consultant that's helping out with a lot of engineering, and then I'm having to spend time getting up to speed on that new permit as well. So that's all just time and expense that is also covered by some of this funding that we're talking about for fees. More specific efforts that the commercial drainage fees and residential drainage fees from the district cover. They fund the MS4 requirements, like I said, specifically the MCM 5, which is post-construction stormwater that is imposed by the EPA through the New York DEC, and then through the town eventually. Under execution, we maintain common waterways and infrastructure, review maintenance of commercial treatment facilities, review development plans in conformance with state standards. We have annual reporting and documentation of drainage facility requirements. The last part there, what is a common drainage way? When we did the residential, and even now, we've had a few people reach out about the commercial saying, We do have our own facilities on site. We maintain all of our own stormwater. We don't need stormwater help from the town. In any of those instances, whether it's residential or commercial, eventually that property, that water typically leaves your site. Even if it doesn't leave your site, these fees help maintain waterways that connect the conveyances that go under roads through major areas. So if we don't maintain these waterways as they go to the lake, you'll eventually have flooding of property and roads. So that benefits everybody. So even if your particular property doesn't have a large discharge that goes out, the work that has to be done on waterways that allow roadways, public facilities, all those type of things to function properly and not be in danger of flooding is what this pays for. That's why everybody pays the fees, regardless of exactly how much water comes out of your property. The code is what defines how much the fee is for each individual. As it comes to public outreach is a big part of the stormwater program. But for this particular effort on the commercial properties, we were able to develop letters to maps and distribute them to all the commercial property owners to explain the fee as it relates to their property, and that's their specific property. The one we did for the residential was a bit more drainage because each residence gets treated the same. They each pay one residential unit as a fee. The commercial properties is a calculation, so we were able to provide them some visuals that help clarify exactly how it's being quantified. There will be a public hearing so that the town board can receive input from Webster residents in relation to these updates to the code, being the ERU and the inclusion of the discount language. Specific questions from property owners who have received the letter referenced above are being answered on an individual basis. We're a little bit over 20 inquiries outside of this right now that we're following up on. Sometimes it's discrepancies in what is actually an impervious surface on their property. Other times it's just understanding what it's for, what's going on, a lot of what we're explaining here. And then there's a handful that want to know where to send a check. There's just a lot of commercial property managers that say, okay, is this due now? What is it due? I bet at least a third of them are just people trying to figure out how to pay the bill, which the letter that was sent out is not a bill. It'll appear on 2025 tax bill. So this is an example of the maps that we use. So this is a parcel in town, took some of the information off, but we were able to map all commercial properties as tracked by the tax ID code through our tax department. We had our GIS person go out and map or use the GIS software that we have and the imagery that we have to map each location. So you see the area highlighted in green on this slide represents the amount of impervious surface that's on this parcel. The parcel is outlined by the white line going around it. So that's the piece of property. The green area is the areas that water doesn't penetrate, doesn't go through, where it's impervious. For this particular one, the total square footage of that is about 26,338 square feet, 0.35 square feet. We're able to get pretty specific with these. So this would be an example of a map that was received with the letters that went out. And then on that letter, it goes into a bit of detail. The next slide shows how the calculation would be for the map we just shown. Just put up there. So that would be the 26,338 square feet divided by the equivalent residential unit, which is the 5,183 square feet. So when you divide those, it comes out to 5.1 total equivalent residential units. Right now, as I said, we're estimating that the cost per equivalent unit is down slightly in 2025 to $40. So it's your 5.1 equivalent units times $40 is $204 would be the fee for this property without discount, which would assume that they didn't have their own stormwater treatment facility of any kind on the site at that time. There have been a few people that have called and said, I do have that. So in that scenario, we're more than happy to take a look at it, get that item identified, and if that's the case, we revise the letter and get the discount. If residents or commercial properties wanted to add stormwater retention features to help treat the stormwater from their facility, say it was a 30-year-old facility before these items existed, they could, and they would qualify for the discount. Next slide speaks to the discount. So the commercial drainage fee discount Commercial properties that own and maintain their own stormwater facilities in accordance with DEC guidelines may qualify for a fee reduction. These facilities include stormwater ponds, infiltration basins, dry swales, or green infrastructure. The fee discount ranges from 20% to 40% depending on the level of treatment that is provided. So you can have features that only treat for certain things. They might treat for water quality, but not overall retention, so that there is some variation in that. So it's looked at on a case-by-case basis. But if you're up to date with the standards that are today, you would get a 40% discount of this fee, which basically takes into account you do have your own expense on your property, but it still provides funds to maintain the features that I discussed earlier that are off the property, like the town handles flood. So I always like to outline the next steps in this process a little bit. Really the next thing coming up here in the next few weeks, it would be to advertise for the public hearing. The public hearing on adopting these changes and making them in the code up to date. And then we would target February 8th for that. February 22nd would be the date we would target for the public hearing. There would be the potential to have a resolution bring to a vote to adopt these changes on that date, depending on the feedback that we get and how the board feels. And then if those were to pass, those resolutions were to pass, then the target would be to have in March of 2024, have the assessors enter the information so that it can appear on the 2025 tax bills. That is it. Ready for questions and or comments?
I have one question. You mentioned that the discount would be proportionate to the type of stormwater facility that the property might have. Do we have documentation in Town Hall as to what was put in when they did that so that we can evaluate that also?
Anything that was tracked through the SWIP, so the MS4 program started in 2006, so anything from then we should have good documentation on what exists. There was facilities put in prior to that where we wouldn't have collected that information because it wasn't pertinent at the time that we would go and collect. We would look for basically documentation from a PE from someone to verify exactly what type of feature they have and what kind of water treatment it was performing. Or we would utilize our own consultant to do that. We do have a pretty good list now, like I said, of places that are performing. Think of places like Lowe's, Wegmans, facilities like that where you see the ponds in front. They're actively submitting annual permits and are up to date. So we have very clear documentation on those. For new individuals coming in, we might have to do a little bit of research, but again, we rely on consultants to confirm the details about that.
Thank you.
And this project, how much will that cost for the town to do this project?
So this is an update of a fee that will be put on the tax bill. So there isn't, it's the time we're spending on it as existing employees would essentially be the cost to implement this, put it in place. Charlie has time reviewing documents, Dolly, myself, Tom and Josh have spent time organizing this and putting it together. So that would essentially be the cost, is the town employees' time to organize it, put it together, put it in. And then once it's on the tax bill, they'll actually yield additional revenue into the funds that, which right now is primarily our department that handles the maintenance of the stormwater. So it actually generates the fees into taxes, and the only cost would be the town employees' time to do what we're doing right now.
And it's interesting because back the last slide before the Q and questions and comments was the next steps, and you had where assessment will enter in the information.
Right.
So we're prepared for the tax bill in 25 to have that on there.
Yeah.
But we won't know the dollars and what it'll cost the taxpayers and property owners, residential and commercial, until we go through the budget process for 25.
So that's the other driver for the ERU, right? So that the dollar amount associated with that is we assess the work we're going to do for each year, and that gets a total value. I think we're right now around the $500,000 range in the general budget that is spent on this right now. And then we develop that for each year, and then sort of look at how many units we have, and we get that amount, right? So if we have 20,000 units, and we have a $500,000 budget, that determines the cost per unit each time. So it's yeah, to quantify it, I wasn't thinking of it when you mentioned it, Tom, because it costs the taxpayers.
And I'm not
versus
sure
the
if
cost
Jenny
of
was
the town.
asking, what does it cost the town to produce
Right,
getting this district done? Or if her question was, what is it going to cost? We know
the taxpayer.
the estimate of $40.
Yeah,
And then that's what it's going to cost, I guess, in fees, aggregate fees to the residential property owners and commercial property.
yeah. And in this particular adjustment, if we're looking at, how many more funds does this bring in to do the things we're saying, I think we had estimated somewhere in the range of $100,000,
Yeah.
give or take, that this is going to bring in additional revenue. So theoretically, that's additional fees that the residents would have, these commercial properties would pay.
Thank you.
Jen? Besides the fact, Jen, that you just found out as the highway liaison, that your first budget season, you will have seen how this affects.
Something new to dig into for that, yep, for sure. I was gonna ask a question, but you already answered it, about the risk of the commercial properties that do manage their own facilities, of the risk of non-compliance. But I heard you say they have to provide annual reports and demonstrate that they're maintained, so that sort of answered my question.
Correct. We're working to make sure that that is more complete. I think there are some facilities out there that that documentation isn't in place on. By all the commercial properties getting this letter, we are getting some calls, so I think we'll actually be able to bring some people into that compliance. But yeah, there's a few mechanisms in the form of agreements that we use with commercial property owners to ensure that they don't get abandoned and are maintained.
And how many commercial properties received the letter? I'm not sure if you shared the number.
I believe the last number we had is about 425. Some of which I believe we're already paying the fee. As I said, they're newer properties, so that is some of the confusion that I'm working on straightening out now. They say, well, I already have this fee. Why am I getting charged this much more? And for the people that are already paying, it's not that much more, right? So the calculation here, it would be the total. Some of them think that, well, I paid $500 last year, now you're telling me it's going to be $600 more. It's not. It's the adjustment makes a difference. I think for some of the properties, it might actually go down. because
It
of
does.
The factor.
They were
Yeah.
factored at 3,500 square feet for and now it's 5,100.
Yeah, so anybody that received these letters is watching this, the amount in that letter is the total, it's not in addition to what you might already be paying.
Pat, I was at the table for this, and Charlie, you have been for a couple of years as we went through the residential migration to add the last 4,000 properties in that 22, and now to go through this. And to me, it's kind of funny, I've come down to this simple analysis, that if you take a look at the 35 square miles on Webster, the common things of that 100 years ago compared to today, Lake Ontario, the streams that go through it, Irondequoit Bay, and if we don't get into political aspects of climate, precipitation. Those are the same in the last 100 years. The two biggest differences in the last 100 years that really are why we're talking about this is that 100 years ago it was all farmland, heavy precipitation, everything that came down went right into the ground. And now, as Pat just said, we have so much impervious area because we built houses, we built buildings, we built driveways, and that water that comes down on that doesn't go in, it's got to go someplace. And the second thing that has changed, and it is what it is, death and taxes, Charlie, that New York State's regulations and MS4 have just exponentially gone up in the last 30 years. And we have to maintain these things, or we're going to have some problems. So it really is forcing a town like Webster that is, I'll call it a wet town, relative. We are we're behind on some of these projects, I think, Pat.
Correct.
Because we've been underfunded in the drainage district to keep up with just regular maintenance, much less doing some preemptive, proactive projects to work on some of the infrastructure that helps get that water to the end place, whether it's the lake or the bay, that we really 100 years ago didn't need because it just settled into land. A lot of impervious area now. And I think the original code back 50s, 60s, whatever, they probably were right. The average was about 3,500 square feet of impervious area. It's now 5,100 square feet. People buy bigger houses. They put in all this stuff. They're taking out the grass and whatever that used to suck the water out. So that's how I built
I
it.
think to underscore too, the purpose, one of the purposes of this is to make the payment of the cost to be distributed more equitably.
No doubt about that.
And, you know, right now, we've had a number of, not only, we've corrected the residential
Yes.
there last year, and the commercial properties we're not paying, if you want to call it fair share.
Yeah.
And this is not a money grab. I think the public needs to know that. This is just, it's similar to, that was a water board assessment. It's taking the same pie and just splitting it in that little fashion.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's not for nothing, right? Tom mentioned, are we behind? You know, it's so that if somebody calls and they have, you know, some slight ponding in the rear of their house, slight ponding in an area that we maintain under easement, if I had to guess right now, I'd say it'd be closer to 2 years than 1 year before we get to that spot. There's a list that long of items and places to be. We are doing damage control. We're doing actual blockages and clogs and flooding and pipes that are collapsed, not pipes that should be replaced in the next 5 years. So we need to get into that. It's not just to, you know, have, I don't know what else you do with them, but there's some serious need, and to me, as the manager of the department, to have the answer be, yeah, I'll put you on a list, and do I see in 2 years? It just isn't an answer that we want to continue to give to the residents that do have issues.
So as part of the budgeting process, it's looking at what is the cost of being more proactive and how much of that is going to be the increase in fees versus the increase overall for being more proactive.
Correct, right. There's the addition of infrastructure, there's more places to maintain and work on as the town grows. And then in addition to that, the cost of everything goes up. The cost of pipe, the cost of labor, the cost of equipment that we use to do this work continues to go up. Some of the things we're supposed to be doing annually are increasing as well. So it's quantity from a lot of different directions that cause that dollar value to need to go up, which is what causes us to look into these certain things and check our code and make sure that we're being as equitable and even as possible and achieving the level of service that we need to.
What I will say, Jen, and like I said, it's going to be your first budget season. The denominator of 20,000 units, we'll know that going in, because we have 16,000 residential units, and then if this all goes through, we'll know how many equivalent units we have on the commercial properties. So let's say, just for argument, it's 20,000. The denominator, to spread this cost fairly, as Charlie said. Now, Pat, in the drainage foreman, or however they do it, they'll propose in June of this year a 2025 budget of work to be done on drainage-related things. And if that gets approved, and it's $800,000, then I think 800,000 divided by 20,000 units is $40 per unit, right? But in that budget process, you can say, yeah, we don't want to do 800 this year, we should cut that down to 600. Well, now it's 600 over 20,000 units, that's $30 per unit. That's how I, simple math, but that's for another day. Because I'm sure you haven't even put pen to paper yet of what you think your 2025 proposed projects are, both just regular maintenance, behind on things, whether you think you can do it with your staff, or whether you think we're gonna have to outsource this, because we gotta get to it, like you said. A lot of moving parts in that.
Yeah, correct. And the basis of how much we're able to get to and how much we want to be able to get to tells me that the likelihood of it going down, right, isn't great, right? We would have to get to a better preventative maintenance stance.
Right.
It's possible. There's some factors right now literally related to staffing. You know, you can only do so much work with so much staff that we want to be realistic about, because we don't want this to be any higher than it has to be. Right now, with the backlog, we would definitely shoot to do more work with the additional money than back off on the quantity. It doesn't seem feasible, but that is exactly how it would work. We got to the point where the quantity of work that we were doing did go down. So would be.
Yeah. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, as I know we've gone along on this one, but I think it merited going on. This is a big one. And proving that it merits going along is that when your predecessor, Joe Hirsch, who was the highway superintendent for, I think, 15 years or whatever, but he'd also worked with the highway department for a previous however many years. When he was retiring in February of 21, and I was just joking with him, like, what would be your parting gift that you'd want? Ha ha. And he said, to be honest with you, Tom, the day before I retire is a Thursday night, it's a workshop. Can I come in and give a presentation to the town board to just give one last imploring them to do something about this drainage district? Do something to expand it, to include the additional 4,000 residential properties, and do something to get the commercial properties into that drainage district, because we are dying on the vine of not being able to do the proper drainage projects. Interesting. Of all the things that he could have asked for, I was thinking he wanted just to go out for a beer, and he asked for that. And he did it. That's 3 years ago, right about now. I think it was early February of 2024.
So you sort of stole
21.
You stole my thunder on that, and I just wanted to say that this is something that we had been considering for many years because of Joe's recommendation and his request, and it never got done. And I have to say that being on the town board for 12, 13 years now, that's a little embarrassing. And I just want to thank the supervisor, I want to thank Pat and everyone in town hall who finally just said, all right, let's get it done. So thank you all for doing